Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Monday, May 8th at 2:01 p.m. and we are here for an allowable ex parte communication briefing in ND-2023-19-A. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Kara Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser, and with us virtually we have Commissioner Irvin. I'm going to recognize our staff counsel, Ms. Clausen, to read the docket.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, commissioners, and to all attendees. Today is May the 8th, 2023, and we are here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for allowable ex parte communication briefing in ND 2023-19-A from the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs regarding the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs and its role in the Public Service Commission dockets. This matter has been noticed on the Commission's website as required by South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-3-260C6.
Thank you, Ms. Clausen. Let's take appearances. Who's here from the Department of Consumer Affairs?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm Carrie Gruby-Leibarker, the Administrator and Consumer Advocate for the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Thank you, Ms. Gruby-Leibarker.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Roger Hall, Deputy Consumer Advocate with the Department.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hall. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for being here today. And who is our neutral with the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Good afternoon, Nanette Edwards. I'm here on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff, and here with me is Ben Mustian as well.
And Ms. Edwards, I'm going to ask that you put your title on the record if you don't mind.
No problem. I am the Executive Director for the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. I'll now recognize Ms. Clausen to go over the ground rules of an allowable ex parte briefing, and we'll then go to the Office of Regulatory Staff in case we miss anything that needs to be stated. Thank you, Ms. Clausen.
Thank you. The subject matter notice to be discussed today relates to the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs briefing on the Department of Consumer Affairs and its role in Public Service Commission dockets. I would remind everyone that this is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C, and the requirements of that statute are in part that the allowable ex parte briefing be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. Therefore, I would ask the presenters, commissioners, and staff to please refrain from discussing any matters not related to the specific topic. The statute prohibits any presenter, commissioners, or commission staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to the ultimate issue which either is or is likely to come before the commission. I would also ask the presenters, staff, and commissioners to refrain from referencing any report, article, statute, or document of any kind that is not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referenced during the briefing must be provided to the Office of Regulatory Staff for inclusion into the record, which will be certified to the Chief Clerk of the Commission, Ms. Jocelyn Boyd. If anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 governing allowable ex parte briefings, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection will be made. And finally, everyone in attendance must sign in or register. Everyone in the hearing room must read, sign, and return the form for which you were given at the door, which will include instructions and the deadline for its return. It is required by law for each attendee to certify that the requirements contained in Section 58-3-260C have been complied with in this presentation. Thank you for your time and attention, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Clausen. Ms. Edwards or Mr. Mustian, is there anything that you'd like to add to the instructions?
Well, the instructions were very thorough, and I compliment Ms. Clausen for being so thorough. And
Thank you.
I will step away from the microphone. If I may, Madam Chair, I would just like to reiterate that we have to confine ourselves to the matter that's been noticed, which is the Department of Consumer Affairs and their role at the Public Service Commission. That's the matter that's been noticed. And then again, if we can confine ourselves to those documents that are included as part of this presentation, any other documents that are referenced, those would have to be produced to the Office of Regulatory Staff in order for us to certify the briefing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Ms. Gruby-Leibarker or Mr. Hall, I'm not sure who's going to start, but the floor is yours. Y'all proceed with your presentation as you see fit.
Thank you so much. And if it pleases y'all, may I stand at the podium up there? I'm a hands talker.
Wherever you are most comfortable, I just ask that we try to speak into the microphones.
Okay, so I'm speaking into the microphone. Everyone can hear me well on this one? Great. Well, thank you again for having us. I am Carrie Gruby-Leibarker, the Administrator and Consumer Advocate for the Department of Consumer Affairs. And you may not know that this ex parte hearing is actually 3 years in the making. So when we had our restored authority back to intervene in utility matters before the PSC, we had hired Richard Witt to assist us, and he recommended that we do an ex parte briefing, which was scheduled in April of 2020. And so COVID said, just kidding. So here we are today. And so it's hopefully timing is everything, that is for sure. So I get the component of the presentation today to talk about the Department of Consumer Affairs and who we are. And then Roger Hall, Deputy Consumer Advocate, is going to talk more about the advocacy division and the role here specifically at the Public Service Commission. But the Department of Consumer Affairs, we were created almost 50 years ago, it was 1974, as the Consumer Protection Agency. We currently have 45 FTEs. 41 of them, I think, are filled right now. It's just the challenge that many agencies are having at this point. We have one office, 293 Greystone Boulevard, right by the zoo. And we have over 120 statutes to administer and enforce, plus their accompanying regulations. We were initially created to take consumer complaints and regulate the consumer credit place or marketplace generally. And then over time, we got more responsibilities added to us. So our mission is to protect consumers from inequities in the marketplace through advocacy, mediation, enforcement, and education. We have a Commission on Consumer Affairs that is our governing policy-making body. 4 commissioners are appointed by the General Assembly, 4 by the Governor, and the Secretary of State serves ex officio. And then they appoint the administrator to do the day-to-day operations of the agency. We have a council of advisors that is not policymaking. It truly is an advisory board made up of 16 members of folks that come from the industries that we regulate, and they meet on a quarterly basis. And then we have 6 divisions that we accomplish our mission through: our Consumer Services Division, our Legal Division, the Identity Theft Unit, our Public Information Division, Administration, and then our Advocacy Division. Our Administration Division is where the Administrator's Office is located, as well as our Human Resources functions, our IT functions, the accounting, procurement, all the support functions. So I'm not going to get too in depth about what that particular division does, but I'll give an overview of the other ones. Then, as I mentioned previously, Roger will go over the Advocacy Division. So the Consumer Services Division is the division that most people know us for because that's the one where we take complaints. We used to say that we get about 4,000 complaints annually, but we're going to top out at 5,000. We believe this year. Since COVID, we've seen kind of an uptick in complaints. And we take any complaints that consumers have against a business. If the topic or the business is not regulated by anybody, no other state or federal agency, then we'll engage in a voluntary mediation process. If the issue or the business is regulated by another state or federal agency, we'll refer it out. If they're regulated by us, that particular complaint will go to our investigative analysts in our legal division. And they are consumer transactions that we're looking at. So it has to involve consumer goods or services purchased for personal, family, or household use. But there are some areas we don't mediate individual to individual complaints. We see that a lot with like Facebook Marketplace and other kind of venues where you just have folks that are trying to sell their own products. And then business versus business, and then with other government agencies as well. We can't handle those complaints. During the last 6 years, we've gotten about 23,000 formal complaints and gotten $10 million in consumer credits, refunds, and adjustments through this process. Now, there are some peripheral utility-related complaints that we do take at the department. One is for cable bills. I think it was 2004 or 2005 that we were given the distinction to have our agency's number and website put on cable bills. So some folks try and pay us their cable bill, instead of complaining to us, but we get a lot of cable-related complaints because our information is located on the bill for those billing disputes, maintenance issues, programming concerns. Sometimes it'll be about a particular pole or a wire, issues such as that we'll handle. And then also telephone, including cell phones, and that could be billing disputes or erroneous charges. It could be the telemarketing complaints, the do not call type of complaints. We receive those at the office as well. And then I mentioned our legal division. So if there is an issue or a business that is regulated by our office and that complaint comes in, it'll kick over to the folks there. The division as a whole helps the administrator to administer and enforce the Consumer Protection Code and the other various laws that have been assigned to our office. So we regulate consumer credit generally. So it's credit sales, leases, loans, and rent-to-owns. So it's not just specific industries, it's anybody who is engaging in those types of business practices. And then we do have statutes that have us regulate or have specific jurisdiction over 15 specific industries, and they run the gamut. When you have a name like the Department of Consumer Affairs, consumer means a lot to a lot of different folks. So not only do we regulate general consumer credit like mortgage brokers, pawn brokers, physical fitness facilities, gyms, because they do credit sales and the way that you pay for products or services. We also regulate pre-need funeral contracts. When folks want to pay for their funerals up front, money has to be held in trust, and there's a lot of financial components and auditing related to that. Athlete agents, the Jerry Maguires of the world, they have to register with our office as well. So it really is a broad spectrum. And just some examples of the enforcement actions that we've done. I think one of our largest was an online lender, Western Sky or Cash Call, and they were doing high-cost lending for consumers online, trying to say they were linked to tribal entities. And there was about $10 million in a settlement with them to where they had to take stuff off of consumer credit reports. They had to kind of wipe off or charge off certain debt and things of that nature. We also recently did a joint action with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau where someone was targeting veterans and their pensions and doing pension loans, quote unquote, which are illegal in South Carolina, and that resulted in a good settlement too for consumers. And then we also process approximately 30,000 regulatory filings annually. You may not know that there's not an interest rate cap in South Carolina. Businesses can charge consumers whatever they want as long as it's not unconscionable for consumer credit transactions. And so if they want to charge in excess of 18%, they have to file that APR with us so that we can post it so that their competitors know and that consumers know as well. And that's a bulk of one of our filings that we get. And interest rates range from 18%, I think, up to 800% was the highest that we had seen in the last filing year. But then also some of these programs, pawnbrokers have to be licensed, mortgage brokers, credit counselors. There's a filing that goes along with a lot of the specific industries that we regulate too. So outside of consumer credit and outside of these regulatory filings, we have some other statutes that are general in nature. Debt collection is one area that we dabble in with the statutes under our jurisdiction, advertising for different products and services. And then solar is another area that we dabble in outside of the utility advocacy role, because solar is one area to where it's home solicitation and it's often a credit sale. And so there's different statutes that roll into that. And then we also have our regulation that we did in 2021, the Renewable Energy Marketing and Sales Regulation. And so this came on the heels of the implementation of 5827-2660 and had us work with ORS and a couple other folks to create a marketing handout that is used in the marketing of renewable energy, as well as a standard disclosure that has to accompany the contracts for that. And so we get a lot of solar complaints. A lot of times it is related to the marketing side of things. And so we're hopeful. This has only been in effect for a couple of years. We have a tickler to look back at it this fall, but we're hopeful that it's alleviating that so we can do kind of some data crawling and see if we've had a decline in any of those kinds of complaints as a result, hopefully, of that regulation and the documents. Our identity theft unit is our newest unit. It came on the heels of the Department of Revenue security breach back in 2012. So in 2013, we were able to launch it. So it's going to have its 10-year anniversary in October, which is exciting. And their focus is education, guidance, and enforcement. So we take scam reports. I just mentioned the solar scams that we often hear of. It's those folks that are saying that they've, their money or their personal identifying information is being requested, and it's not a legitimate business who is doing so. So that kind of separates the complaints from the scams. And we got, over the last 2 years, about 2,000 scam reports with folks reporting they've lost $6.3 million to those scams. And then we also provide identity theft victim assistance. So if somebody is a victim of identity theft, they can contact our office, and we do one-on-one tailored guidance to try and mitigate that identity theft event. Because it really depends on the type of identity theft that occurs, to what kind of checklist needs to be taken to try and mitigate it. And unfortunately, once you're a victim of identity theft, it kind of rears its ugly head later on too. So it's lots of documentation and just education on what to do in case that circumstance occurs as well. And then we conduct outreach and education. That's really a huge component of our mission, trying to make sure that consumers and businesses are aware of their rights and responsibilities under the laws. But we definitely want to make sure folks know what they can do to try and prevent identity theft from occurring, because oftentimes it's us who's the #1 tool that we have in doing so. And from 2020 to 2022, we got almost 1,100 identity theft reports where folks had reported having $4.6 million in losses. And then our Public Information and Education Division. So as I said, education is a core component for us. There are way more scammers out there and folks that don't want to do good than us. And so spreading the word and making sure that people know what they can do and tell all their friends what they can do to prevent becoming victims, and to just educate themselves when they're going out into the business marketplace to try and prevent being taken advantage of at all. So we serve as the main consumer education portal for consumers, businesses, and media. Our office gets about 25,000 calls annually, and a lot of times it's not for our services. It's just that people don't know where to go or where they can get their particular service that they're looking for. So we have a big old book up front where we can direct them to where they need to be. So in the last 5 calendar years, we have done about 510 presentations to over 20,000 folks. Identity theft, scams, debt collection, foreclosures, homeowners associations, that's another specialty area that we have some complaint jurisdiction in. We don't have authority, but we have to take those complaints. Those are our hot topics. And then we also do consumer education brochures, which we have some of those in y'all's packets today. Some of our more popular brochures on identity theft, on credit reports, and Ditch the Pitch, our scam guide. That's a lot of the information that we like to disseminate. It's very general, and it covers a lot of bases for what people may see generally in the marketplace. And it's all for free. People can go online and get all sorts of good information, publications from us, so that, again, we can get the information to the hands of the folks so that we can all be educated consumers, savvy consumers out there. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll turn it over to Roger.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Like Carrie said, Roger Hall, Deputy Consumer Advocate with the department. I am also the Division Director for the Consumer Advocacy Division. And our role is a little bit separate and unique from the rest of the agency, though it does, we do intertwine, and I'll try to explain a little bit about that and, of course, our role here at the PSC. As Carrie mentioned, the division was, the Consumer Protection Code and the department were created around 1974, 1975. The statute was amended in 1978 to specifically create the advocacy division, and also create the position of consumer advocate. Currently, the advocate must be an attorney who has been admitted to practice for a minimum of 8 years. That was revised in 2018 from 5 years. And historically, the administrator has been the consumer advocate unless the administrator was not an attorney. So again, by law, the consumer advocate must be an attorney. So again, Carrie is our current consumer advocate, and my role is deputy. Originally created for all kinds of rates issues and utilities. You'll see milk rates was a hot topic back then, and one of the things I think that prompted the creation of this division. So luckily, I think the competitive marketplace takes care of some things, but not others. So that's what we're here for. So we do things besides utilities. So I wanted to touch on those so you understand some of the different roles we have. These are kind of our three main roles that I have here on the screen. So insurance, we by statute provide legal representation for the consumer interest in rate-making matters involving insurance. Currently includes workers' compensation and homeowners. Historically, auto insurance was part of that, but auto insurance is no longer included in our role. You know, we see here fair, just, reasonable, terms like that, the PSC. One thing I've found interesting with insurance is that we're looking to make sure they're not excessive, inadequate, or unfairly discriminatory. So insurance companies, you want to make sure they have enough money to pay claims if and when they come up. So we receive, since I've been here, on average about 200, we review about 690 insurance filings per year. These come through the Department of Insurance for those types of insurance where we have authority. They also have to have a certain threshold. It has plus or minus 7% increase or decrease in rates before we have jurisdiction. We do employ an outside actuary to assist us with those to help with reasonableness reviews. I thought the utilities was complicated when I first started reviewing it. Insurance rate making, I think, is much more complicated. So we do have to have some professionals help us there. Rulemaking is our second function. Again, under the statute, we monitor state and federal agency rulemaking processes when they're attempting to fix prices for consumer goods or services. So essentially what that role entails is we're reviewing the Federal Register daily, we're reviewing the State Register monthly to see if other agencies are proposing regulations that may impact consumers. They may do requests for information, looking for information from states or agencies like ours. What we're trying to really offer there is the South Carolina consumer experience. They're looking for information, decide should we pass this rule, should we not, how should we approach this issue? And so that is where we really get involved with our other divisions, our consumer services division that Carrie mentioned, and our legal division as well. We'll see what kind of complaints do we have. Can we provide some real world data from South Carolina to assist those agencies in their rulemaking process? And then if appropriate, if we have good information to provide, we'll write a formal comment letter for those rulemaking procedures. Let's see, since I've been here, we're averaging what I call full review, about 44 full reviews a year. That's when we really do take a deep dive. Again, we're reviewing the register, every item in the register, but doing about 44 deep dives a year and issuing about 7 comment letters per year. So our last role, again, kind of what we're here to discuss, obviously, more detail is our utility role. And I'll kind of cover that a little bit more throughout the rest of the presentation. Well, I kind of forgot this slide was here. We have some other duties involved. So those were our 3 main roles. Some other functions for our division and the consumer advocate, specifically our certificate of need for health facilities and services under 44-7-160. We're a part of the State Health Planning Committee by statute. We are a member of the advisory board for the Associated Automobile Insurance Plan of South Carolina, which is essentially a way to provide insurance for folks that normally would not be able to get insurance through typical means. The Consumer Advocate serves on the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And again, related to our media function that Carrie mentioned, we have a statutory obligation to report to the public through the news media any changes in regulations and rate structures. So that gets into our public information, but as well as our rulemaking comment letters. So this is just a little bit sort of a roadmap. Our jurisdiction and role at the PSC can kind of be broken into a couple different areas, or a couple different time frames rather. So from 1978 to 2004, talk a little bit about that. In 2004, the legislature created ORS and removed our responsibility to intervene at the PSC, and that role was restored in 2018. So just again, I'm going to kind of break this up into a little bit of the statutory history. Not going to go deep into it. Some of you I know are attorneys, some might be more interested than others in this, but it's kind of a way for me to sort of break down our different functions. So again, 1978, created by the legislature. You'll see here to provide legal representation of the consumer interests before the state regulatory agencies when they undertake to fix prices, rates or prices for consumer products and services. Again, covers utilities, covers insurance, very broad, and to monitor regulations and report to the public. those functions have stayed the same throughout, pretty much throughout our history, with slight nuances. But this was, again, the broad authority that created our role. We also have another, I think even broader, don't have any real specific examples to, when it's been implemented, but we actually have authority to, if we would determine it would be in the interest of consumers, that we can file with an agency to ask them to look into a particular organization. I think of it as sort of a catch-all that as other regulations and laws have been passed over the years, maybe we haven't had to use, but we do have sort of a catch-all ability to ask other agencies to look into consumer issues. So the first change in our authority came in 1989 and just basically just added federal to our authority. So we can, again, review any matters that may affect consumers, product services, and rate making at a federal level. And 1992 added the certificate of need and healthcare issues that licensing that I mentioned. Also at that time added a proviso to carry forward of witness funds. So finally, I mentioned 2004, authority was removed with the creation of the Office of Regulatory Staff. The statutory language for ORS, which I'll get into a little bit more, is the public interest. Ours is the consumer interest. So we see a distinction there, something that was talked about at the legislature, but I'll address that a little bit further later. And you'll see there also all of any cases that we were a part of at that time were transferred to our ORS at that time. Little snapshot, I just thought this was an interesting chart from one of our old accountability reports. Not sure how aware you all are of the number of filings of the PSC historically. So these are sort of the 7 years leading up to 2004. Just on the left side, you'll just see how many overall cases were filed at the PSC by utility companies. As noted below there, at the time in 2003-04 in the accountability report, they noted the consumer advocate reviewed all notices for impact on consumers. We try currently. We track a lot of filings. I can't say that we review all notices, but we try to review and file as many as we can. And then you'll see on the right-hand side there the actual number of cases that the consumer advocate was involved in over those years, dwindling down before the authority was removed in 2004. I couldn't find quickly a lot of information on pre-1997 and the types of cases we were involved in, but I do know that historically consumer advocate was involved in a lot of telecom cases, so a lot of filings there, which I think drives up some of those numbers, and I'll mention briefly that's not something that we are currently intervening in, or telecom or transportation cases. So again, 2018 restored part of our role at the PSC. Similar language, you see there, advocate for the interest of consumers before the PSC. The Office of Regulatory Staff's representation of the public interest, that definition has changed at least once. I won't go into the history of that, but they represent the public interest, which is defined currently as concerns of the using and consuming public with respect to public utility services, regardless of the class of customer, and preservation of continued investment and maintenance in utility facilities so as to provide reliable and high-quality utility services. So one distinction, again, consumer interest is not defined by the statute, but we look to the Consumer Protection Code generally, by this portion of the statute, but we look to it generally to define it as South Carolina residents who purchase utility services primarily for personal, family, or household use. So kind of one distinction is ORS looking to a broad range of customers. We are specifically looking to residential customers. Another distinction by statute, ORS is a party to every case. We are provided notice and may intervene as we determine. So we're not automatically a party. A little bit of other history here, just not sure how aware you are of kind of the past role and current role of the department, but kind of a distinct difference here in authority and in budget and staffing. So I was going to touch on that. Again, I just use the years of the statutes that we just went through just to get a little snapshot. A lot of information on this slide. I'm not going to go through it all, but it's essentially showing that after its inception and prior to 2004, our advocacy division staff ranged from about 7.5 to 12 staff members, and budgets for contractual services, specifically for witnesses, range from about $218,000 to $348,000. Obviously, those dollars in 1980 were worth a little bit more today. And just to continue that, just showing a little bit. So when we started off, were not provided any additional funding for contractual services. We were able to use some of our other fund funding to shift around and figure out how to get involved with the PSC. We have a lot of attorneys and legal experience participating in other courts and in the agency, but the PSC, as I'm sure you all know, is unique, and every administrative body is a little unique. So a little bit of a learning curve there for us. We spent that time trying to get some attending trainings and different things, and meeting with folks. As Carrie mentioned, Mr. Witt was a lot of help to us in the beginning as well. So this just again shows since the authority came back, started off with no budget for contractual services, but now since 2021 we have $260,000 for witnesses, and have averaged about 3 to 4 staff during that time. One point, all of our funds are appropriated annually by the legislature. But we do have the ability to carry forward anything that we haven't used. Currently, as you can see here, we normally have 2 attorneys and 2 paralegals, and of course the assistance of Sly Barker when needed. Unfortunately, since about November, we're down an attorney and down a paralegal. So it's me and Joan Williams, who's our paralegal. I believe y'all may have met her during a recent case where Phil Porter had to fill in for me, actually. So she was up here assisting him. So hoping to get those positions filled as soon as possible, but it's been a little tough. Let's see. Skipping forward here, just a little snapshot of some of the cases we've been involved in. These aren't all of them, primarily rate cases and administrative dockets. But like I said, we kind of were gearing up, right? We got this authority back, not really sure what all it was going to entail, how we were going to pay for it. But so this was before we really kind of understood the ins and outs of rate cases here, before we had funding for witnesses, but we were able to intervene in the Blue Granite rate case and the Palmetto Utilities rate case in our first fiscal. These are fiscal year. In our first fiscal year with the authority being restored. Like I said, during that time, we were meeting with folks, attending trainings, the Michigan State Rate School, talking to different experts, trying to understand the issues. My position was originally posted, I think, right after the authority was restored. I understand they had a little bit of difficulty finding people. First, I joined the agency, I believe, last week or so of January 2020. So. Just a little bit more snapshots, so kind of adding a little bit of cases as we go along. Still, at this point in time, no specific funding for contractual services, and a $290,000 total budget for the division. But starting to get our feet wet a little bit, learn a little bit about what we're doing, get involved in bigger cases, the Dominion Energy rate case, and the Duke Energy avoided cost cases, and Palmetto wastewater reclamation rate case. So again, I won't go through all of these, but at this point in time, here in 2021 to 2022, we did asked the legislature for $260,000 for witness expenses and funding for an additional paralegal. So starting to get a little help, and able to intervene a little bit more and address some other issues. And then finally, just current year, said down 2 staff at the time, still trying to get involved where we can. We've intervened in every full rate case since 2019. We've intervened in some different administrative dockets, commenting on the commission's reg review process, commenting on the direct, I forget the docket was actually called, but direct and rebuttal testimonies. A lot of those comments were trying to help all interveners that may come before you all, just to level the playing field and give them a chance to make their cases when they can't do so individually. As I mentioned earlier, we do try to follow the majority of the electric, gas, and water and sewer matters that are filed. to the extent we can. We have decided not to get involved in telecom and transportation cases for a couple of reasons. There's a little bit more inherent, I think, competition in those matters or between those companies, and just given the high volume of them, that we're going to keep our focus on the electric, gas, water, and sewer. So that is all I have. I don't know if Carrie wanted to add anything to that, but to the extent you all have questions for either of us, we'd be happy to answer them.
Mr. Hall, thank you very much for your presentation. I'd just like to clarify, the Department of Consumer Affairs and your advocacy division, am I correct that y'all do not have in-house engineers, CPAs, or field experts, and that any expert that you bring to the commission, you're having to hire outside experts? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And under your enabling legislation, am I correct that whether or not to intervene in any case here at the commission is the sole discretion with the consumer advocate? Is that correct?
Yes, that's
by
that's
statute.
the language in the statute.
Yes. Okay. And I believe you stated that right now y'all's budget for experts is $260,000.
That's right. And one thing I didn't mention, that also, like I said, we do use an outside actuary for our insurance matters. So that number's not just utilities. That's for any.
That's for any expert for
Anybody.
all of the kind of cases y'all participate in?
That's right.
Insurance or utility?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that clarification. Commissioners, questions for Mr. Hall or Ms. Gruby-Leibarker? Commissioner Williams, Justin Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Consumer Advocate, Deputy Consumer Advocate, thank you all for coming. So this had to be 2019, I believe. I went before the Public Utility Review Committee for a yearly evaluation, and the Consumer Advocate came up, and the discussion was about the enabling legislation and your role. And so after that, you appeared. And so I wanted to thank you for appearing. It seems to me, and I'm not an actuary, I'm not the chair anymore, so I don't look at the commission's budget that closely. But based on my experience and what I have reviewed, $260,000 for experts, that's all inclusive, if I'm understanding you correctly, not just utility cases, does not seem like enough money to try cases over here. Is that your experience?
The cases, it depends. As you know, there are a lot of different issues involved in different cases. We try to be selective about what issues we focus on. As we've gotten more experience in these cases, I mean, there are certainly times where we may would like to address another issue beyond what we do address, but we do the best with what we have. And we've talked about it as, we don't necessarily try to go to the legislature every year and ask for more money and things like that. We want to have a good foundation for that request. So I certainly think we could address more issues and employ more experts if we had more money. And it just depends. Again, the cases vary from year to year, how many filings there are. We've tried to focus on the full rate cases, though, as we've learned, as we've done more of these, just about every case impacts rates. So again, I guess with additional funds, we could get involved beyond the full rate cases. But certainly it's the utility rate making is not cheap to get involved in, and the experts who have a lot of knowledge and they recognize their worth. Let's put it that. I guess trying to put it. One thing that helps is they do tend to work with consumer advocates a little bit more, I think. So I think the rates we pay might be a little lower than some others, but again, it's not cheap.
Right. Well, I mean, I think in this area, we all know if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense for folks. Consumer advocate, do you have a vision for the office? I mean, consumer consumer advocates across the nation address issues in the utility world. So I'm just wondering, do you have a thought of like what you want your consumer advocate that focuses on utilities? What do you want that office to look like? I know what it looks like now based off the presentation, but is there an office of your dreams that you would like to share with us, a vision for that?
I mean, I think history is a good kind of foundation for us. And when we look back, Roger mentioned looking back at the old annual reports and things of that nature, that when I started at the department in 2004 as a law clerk, and we called them our mini law firm. And it was right before the transition away from us having the role here. So I envisioned something close to what it was back in that time, to when there weren't those kinds of decisions that had to be made as to where we were going to allocate resources as much as we do now, most certainly. But as Roger stated, I think this was totally new for us. I didn't get a phone call saying, would you like to intervene in utility rate cases again? And so when I had heard about it, I was interested and did a little bit of research myself to kind of see what that did look like, and listened closely to what the legislators said during the debates on the floor and what they anticipated our office was going to function as with the restored role, and just tried to piecemeal it. I mean, truthfully, we've only had 2 full years in full setup with staffing and budgeting at this level. So we're certainly having those discussions of what the vision should be, at the same time not having a lot of experience under our belts.
Understood. Could you tell me a little bit more about that mini law firm? How many lawyers were there at that time, if you remember?
I think, let me look, Roger had it on one of the slides. I want to say it was around 8 at the point in time when I had come on, or it was just winding down. We had a lot of folks leave our office whenever it was becoming clear in the early 2000s that it was going in the way of reformation for utility rate making. But yeah, it was about 8 staff. They had decreased the budget, I think, by a couple $100,000 again going into that time, but we had 8 staff in the advocacy division at that point in time in 2004.
And obviously that was a time before avoided costs, before net energy metering, before IRPs and the like.
Yeah, and telecom, like Roger said, was huge. There was a lot of reformation, I think, in those rate structures and how they had to come before the PSC. In that 2005, there seemed to be a lot of utility-based amendments to how things functioned and worked in rate making.
All right. Well, I just want, I hear you all sort of qualifying your performance with being up and running for 2 years and learning. I just want to say that your presence in the cases have made a difference. I remember cases before there was no consumer advocate and cases after there was a consumer advocate, and the cases are different. So regardless of what your internal discussions may be about how well you're doing or where you could improve, just know that there's a difference in a case presented before the commission, a full contested case presented before the commission, when the consumer advocate is present and when the consumer advocate is not present. So I appreciate what you all are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Caston?
Excuse me. Ms. Liebarker, Mr. Hall, thank you for this presentation. You know, when I came on just, seems like last week, but it's 3 years ago now, I think. I had no idea how much paper I was going to be surrounded by, none. But because of that, I'd heard of the DCA, but that's about it. That was my limited knowledge of it. And this has been incredibly informative to me. One, I don't see how you do it. And I'm not going to try to put words in your mouth, Mr. Hall, but it seems like you have to pick and choose. But if you had the resources, you might choose more.
Yes, I think that's fair.
Well, from a selfish perspective, I think that would be good for us too. But listen, I appreciate this presentation. It's really, like I say, I had no idea. Good job.
Thank you. We'd take any chance we get to get the message out about not just our utility work, but all the other services we provide as well.
That's certainly one of our challenges is folks don't know who the Department of Consumer Affairs is, just in and of itself. When I was a 2-year law student looking for a job, I went to the pro bono office and said, I will work for free. I just need some experience. They said, oh, well, the Department of Consumer Affairs just needed a law clerk. Maybe they need another one. I said, who? Like the Department of who? So a lot of people know who we are when the big breaches come along, or there's a hurricane and they need assistance with disaster recovery scans or something. But this being here at the PSC is definitely a consistent role that gets into the public eye. That's for certain.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Commissioners, questions?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Urban?
thank you. Thank you all for being with us today, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I know that your staff is stretched thin with all the responsibilities that you have, that you've outlined for us. I agree with Commissioner Justin Williams that the cases you have intervened on during my term on the commission, your work has been high quality work, and it was very informative and very helpful to have your perspective, along with all the other testimony and evidence that was presented and entered in the record. And really to the point that when you're not here, I miss you. I don't know if you heard, but we had a case recently that we discussed last week where I lamented the fact that you had not intervened to protect consumer interest. And it's in a perfect world you'd be in every case, but I understand that's not possible with the resources that you have. But I also agree with Commissioner Justin Williams that I believe if you took your case to the General Assembly, to the Ways and Means Committee, subcommittee that handles your budget, that I think that given the fact that revenues are up now, that we fortunately have been able to get some funds to expand services, might not be a bad time to make that ask in the next budget cycle, because you have a vital and important role, and I can't emphasize enough how blessed we are that you're there to intervene on behalf of consumers and customers that might otherwise not have a voice. And so with that, I hope that going forward, you'll look at the rate cases, including the fuel cases, which kind of fall into that group. That's what we were discussing last week. You chose not to intervene, but I thought in hindsight, it might have been helpful had you intervened, because there were some issues that perhaps could have been fleshed out and discussed further had you been a party, and we missed that opportunity, and we missed seeing you. So I encourage you to look at the fuel cases. Many times that's really where hundreds of millions of dollars in fuel costs are passed on to ratepayers, and they have to absorb 100% of it under current state law. So it has a tremendous impact on residential ratepayers. And so keep that in mind going forward, because you represent those who in many cases have no voice and no representation, and we appreciate all that you do. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Commissioners, anything further?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Thomas?
thank you. And I'd like to express my appreciation also. I think you all have meaningful input when I've seen you, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate hearing about all of the many, many other areas that you're involved in. I had no idea that just all the different business that you have an impact on. And I didn't hear you mention one that is, I don't know, it's probably not a big business in South Carolina, but there are a lot of timeshares, and it seems to me that I've had a few people, that have had questions, not because I know anything about them, but anyway, problems in that area. Just wonder, do you all get involved in that at all?
So timeshares is in our top 3 of complaints. That's when you have a beautiful coast, it brings others to you, and as well with that comes timeshares for certain. We do not have any general regulatory authority over timeshares themselves or timeshare companies. We have done some conferences or forums with some timeshare companies. They have a resort development association that we can bring our concerns when we see a pattern or a practice in complaints come through, that we bring them to the table to see how we can potentially come up with a solution. That's a lot of our refunds do come from being able to cancel out timeshare contracts, vacation clubs, kind of the same, along those same lines as well. But it is a continuing issue that we've seen. One of the areas that I failed to mention in doing the presentation and the role of the administrator is that I have the responsibility of advising the legislature and the governor on issues that affect consumers, that affect the consumer interest. Timeshares is certainly one of those that has come up. We were able to get, I think it was 2018, maybe 2019, a timeshare resale law, because that was an abusive area that we saw with regards to timeshares and scams in that area too, and also worked with the Resort Developers Association to try and figure out a way to have a clear exit path for folks if that was what they were seeking, because that's why they go to the scammers oftentimes too. So there was a law that was passed there that allows us to deal specifically with those complaints and have enforcement over those timeshare resellers, those third parties, but not under the original timeshare companies. There is a timeshare law. The Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation is the state agency that is tasked with administering and enforcing it, but it's a lot of disclosure-based law. One thing we've discussed internally is making a recommendation to extend the cancellation timeframe, because people will sign up for the timeshares and the cancellation comes and goes while they're still on vacation in Myrtle Beach or Hilton Head, or having a wonderful time. By the time they get home and they go, we're not going to be able to make it back on a consistent basis to be able to benefit from this, it's too late for cancellation. So that's something we've been talking about internally too. But education is a big area for timeshares for us.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Carol Williams?
Thank you. I'm going to add my appreciation for today, as well as what you bring to this hearing room and to our hearings all the time. I think what my colleagues have said that I'll boil down is that we end up with more robust discussion, more robust testimony. You give us more that we can ask questions about when you are able to participate. And then I have a real pragmatic question. I look at page 5 of your presentation, and that's where you talk about utility-related complaints. Mm-hmm. And I have tried to understand where electric, gas, and water, when a complaint would go to you and when a complaint would go to ORS, or whether you both take the same complaints. But I noticed that you don't mention electric, gas, or water on this. And I know that when we have public hearings, we are always sending people to the utility and to ORS. Mm-hmm. Since I'm going to admit my ignorance in front of everybody, I would love to learn from the powers that be.
Sure. No, that's not ignorance by any means. I mean, there's a lot of crossover between, and not crossover, everybody has buckets, but different buckets within the same industry. But ORS has the investor-owned utilities that they fall under their jurisdiction. They can take those complaints. You can send them to ORS because we have a great working relationship, that they will send them to us if it does not fall in their jurisdiction. Okay. And we say the same thing to folks. If you have a utility complaint, you can file it to us. You don't need to remember everybody's numbers. And then if we don't have it, if it falls under the investor-owned umbrella, then it will kick it over that way. A lot of complaints that we get are against government agencies, city of X, water and sewer. And we can't mediate those complaints because they are government agencies. But then you have these quasi, not government agencies, but they were created by a statute kind of entities, that if it's a billing issue, we will attempt to mediate it and let them know. Otherwise, we have to send them to the governing board. A lot of times there's infrastructure complaints, and they just kind of fall in a limbo kind of area.
Thank you. I can imagine that that's I understand that, but I can imagine it's a good thing y'all have a good working relationship because would be really hard to communicate.
Right.
Thanks again.
Sure.
Commissioners, anything further?
Madam Chair,
Vice Chair Powers?
thank you. I too would add my appreciation and thank you to you when you talk about governing agencies. A lot of things I realize we don't handle. So a lot of water and sewer companies are either county or two county based or something. I guess those come under a home rule statute, and you're not allowed to be involved in those either.
Yeah, if it's a government agency, we can't mediate out that complaint, unfortunately, if they're on the receiving end. We will make them aware of it. We have often tried to bring the consumer and the government agency together to make sure that they're aware of the issue, especially, I think it was last summer, there was one in particular who's, well, I wouldn't name them anyway. I can't think of their name. But I think, got 20 calls within a 3-day period about this particular city water company. And so we picked up the phone and contacted the town administrator and went through the line of things and were able to help them get that resolved, or at least let consumers know who to contact and that, yes, they were aware of the issue and working through it. So even if we can't directly engage in a voluntary mediation role, we'll still try and find some sort of resolution or connect the parties to one another.
Let somebody know there is a complaint.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
If I may, Ms.
Commissioner Caston?
Many things I don't know much about, but I know a little bit about the water utility side, the non-investor-owned utility. And, you know, whether it's a municipal system, a CPW, or a special purpose district, such as that, typically all have either a commission or some governing authority, either elected, appointed. So I'm not aware of any that are not. But I know at least there are associations, say, in the state, whether it's the American Water Works Association, the Water Environment Association. If you can't get the right folks, at least they could probably help you know who to contact, whether that's the commission, the commission chair, the utility director. But I just kind of wanted to. About the only thing I can contribute. I wanted to contribute something useful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything further? Ms. Gruby-Leibarker or Mr. Hall, anything further?
We just appreciate y'all's time today and your kind words. We feel the same about the budget and feel as though that we have the data necessary to go before the legislature to have an increase in the request. And also, as Roger mentioned, looking at the statutes and seeing some areas that there could be some room for improvement too, that we feel as though we have the capability under our jurisdiction to advise the legislature of our opinions there as well. So we appreciate the dialogue today.
Well, let me just add my thank you for y'all coming in and talking to us and telling us it's obvious it's not just utility work that you're doing. You've got your fingers in a lot of different areas by statute, and I'd just like to thank y'all and commend y'all for the job that y'all have done over here. It really does bring a lot to the proceedings when y'all are involved, and I appreciate. I don't like to speak for other people, but I certainly appreciate y'all's participation. Y'all have done a nice job, and I think I've told Mr. Hall that he's done a good job, so do appreciate that. Thank you. Ms. Edwards or Mr. Mustian, anything from ORS?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Well, as there's nothing further, we will adjourn and close this proceeding, and thank you again. We are adjourned.